You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old time and bluegrass music. This is one of the first tunes I ever played on banjo. It was an easy one to learn because I already knew the melody, even though I didn't know exactly where I first heard it. Of course, the tune has been recorded thousands of times, not just with folk musicians. The song made what is likely its most well-known appearance in the 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz. That scene when Dorothy returns home from the land of Oz back to Kansas after tapping those red shoes and reciting the lines, "There's no place like home." There's even an entire house museum in New York entirely dedicated to this now iconic song. And for due reason, as Home Sweet Home has been considered by many historians to be one of the most, if not the most popular song of the 1900s. While its popularity has faded somewhat in the modern age, it is still commonly played in the American folk tradition. So stick around because we'll listen to some of the earliest recordings of this tune, and we'll explore how it played a hand in helping develop the transition between old-time and bluegrass music. The tune is over 180 years old, but the trail is pretty well marked. And stay till the end, because I'll even play a recording that is over 120 years old and it's found in a completely different genre of music. So let's dive in. Well, it's not the first ever recording of the tune, it is one of the earliest made by a string band. It was recorded in 1927 by this man, the banjo player Frank Jenkins. Jenkins made a number of commercial recordings in the late 1920s and had a long career as a traveling musician with his children, Oscar and Myrtle. Jenkins was born in 1888 in Surry County, North Carolina. Surry County had and still has a strong tradition of old-time music, and even the great Tommy Jarrell, Rafe Brady, Leek Cottle, and Charlie Higgins all recalled spending time playing music at the Jenkins house at some point in time. What's interesting to note about this arrangement is that Jenkins is playing the banjo with a three-finger banjo style. While many today consider Earl Scruggs the founder of three-finger banjo picking, Jenkins' recording makes clear that Earl wasn't the first to invent it. Of course, Jenkins' style of three-finger picking is quite a bit different from the one that Earl developed and helped popularize. Earl's playing has that driving rolling pattern that would define bluegrass music a generation later. But Jenkins' picking has more of that earlier melodic classic style, which you'll hear in some of those early jazz and rag bands. While Jenkins is playing a solo banjo on this piece, he recorded this tune along with 17 other numbers in 1927 with a band called the DaCosta Waltz's Southern Broadcasters. While not as well known today as some other early country music artists of the 1920s, like the Skillet Lickers or the Carter family, DaCosta Waltz led one of the first and finest string bands to record from that musically rich area that includes such locales as Galax and Hillsville in Virginia, and Mount Airy, North Carolina. A couple of years after this recording, Jenkins would go on to make some recordings with the popular Ernest Stoneman. Later on, he and his children Oscar and Myrtle traveled for several years with Dr. Calloway's Medicine Show, based out of Winston-Salem. They toured around the region, helping to sell what Calloway dubbed his Golden Cure, a concoction that was said to cure all sorts of ailments. While Jenkins passed in 1945, his musical legacy continued on for several generations in Surry County. His son Oscar would later play with Tommy Jarrell and Fred Cockram during the folk revival of the 1960s to record some highly influential albums for County Records.
Oh, it's home, home, sweet home.
year after Jenkins' recording of Home Sweet Home, in 1928, we find another legendary recording of the tune as performed by McMichen's Melody Men. This trio included Clayton McMichen on fiddle, Riley Puckett on guitar and vocals, and we don't know for certain, but possibly Katie Malone on clarinet. You'll notice that his version of Home Sweet Home is played in 3/4 time, while Jenkins' was played in 4/4. And this is one of those tunes that is commonly played in both time signatures. While McMichen and Puckett are better known for their work with the Skillet Lickers at the time, the pair did record a number of tunes on their own. Like many of these tunes, Home Sweet Home, with its more sentimental feel, are a bit different than the more rough and tumble numbers common with the Skillet Lickers band. Part of the reason why McMichen chose to record it was due to his interest in many styles of music. In these Melody Men recordings with Puckett, he leaned heavily toward the popular numbers of the day, a repertoire that consisted of current pop tunes, jazzy or uptown country numbers, and even those turn-of-the-century favorites. Home Sweet Home was one of these numbers, and we'll get back to its popularity outside of the old string band tradition in a bit, but in the following years, throughout the 1930s, the tune would go on to be recorded by a number of cowboy and western-style bands, including Jimmy Davis, Harry McClintock, and Edward L. Crane. The song would lend itself well to this genre, and while the basic melody would pretty much stay the same in all of these versions, usually different lyrics and titles were added.
It's a story of my mother, brother, and dear old dad.
As I mentioned, the song wasn't just found in early forms of country music. A generation before McMichen's recording, the song was a popular one with musicians on the vaudeville circuit. Back in 1908, a woman by the name of Fleda Jan Brown took the basic melody of Home Sweet Home and created her own version of the song entitled "The Party That Wrote Home Sweet Home Never Was a Married Man." This song would later go on to be picked up by the vaudeville and minstrel singer and comedian Eddie Morton, who recorded this version way back in 1910.
Oh, the party that wrote that Home Sweet Home never was a married man. He never had a loving wife to greet him with a frying pan. Oh, he never knew that the welcome mat meant family jars and things like that. Oh, the party that wrote that Home Sweet Home never was a married man.
This song would eventually play an important role in the development of bluegrass music when, 17 years later, in 1927, two North Carolina musicians, Charlie Parker, not the saxophone player, and Mac Wulbright recorded a take on Morton's tune. They dropped the speaking parts and added some verses for the song entitled "The Man Who Wrote the Home Sweet Home Never Was a Married Man." Unfortunately, I couldn't get the rights to play the actual recording, but I'll provide a link in the comments below. The banjo player in the track, Mac Wulbright, was a blind musician who, like Frank Jenkins, also played this tune in a three-finger style. The story goes that one day Wulbright was sitting out on the porch playing this tune when a 6-year-old boy walked up to him. The child immediately fell in love with the tune and the intricate picking coming from that banjo. The boy was absolutely smitten. He had heard the banjo being played at home before in that frailing style, but nothing like this. When the boy returned home, he grabbed his brother's banjo and tried to mimic Wulbright's picking style. Only problem was, his left hand couldn't even reach all the way down the neck, so he just set the instrument on the floor and moved around depending on what part of the fretboard he was playing. He kept at it for some time, and when he wasn't in school or doing farm chores, he spent nearly every spare moment he had practicing. The effort would later pay off. When he was just 11 years old, he got to play on the radio. And during his early years, he learned from some other banjo players and eventually developed his own unique three-finger style of picking that was a bit different than Wulbright's. Less melodic, but with a lot more drive. And it would soon take the music industry by storm. When he turned 21 years of age, he got a job playing the banjo with a popular musician from Kentucky by the name of Bill Monroe. In case you haven't guessed it by now, that boy's name was Earl Scruggs. Earl would go on to play Home Sweet Home as one of his signature numbers, and he would eventually record the tune in 1960 on his legendary Foggy Mountain Banjo album, which kind of sealed the deal for making this tune a popular one for bluegrass pickers throughout the country. But Earl wasn't actually the first banjo player to record this tune in a bluegrass setting. It was actually recorded 5 years previous to the Foggy Mountain Banjo album with Reno and Smiley in 1955. And there are some legendary bluegrass recordings on YouTube of this tune being performed by Reno and Ralph, as well as Earl and Doc, which you should check out. But I should also probably mention that the tune is also very popular in the French-speaking music world as well. In the winter of 1928, Quebecois fiddler Joseph Allard reworked Home Sweet Home as a reel and recorded it under the title Quadrille de Chez Nous, or Reel of Our Home, for Victor Records in Canada. If you notice a similarity to Buffalo Gals on this one, you're not the only one. A much different version, but just as important one, was recorded by a Cajun group called the Beaux Frères. They performed the tune as a waltz. It was recorded in 1934, but it can be found in Harry Smith's legendary folk anthology album, which was released in 1952. Up till now, I've played recordings of this tune mainly from the folk tradition, but it wasn't always just a folk number. In order to explore where this tune originally came from, we need to shift gears a bit and explore a completely different genre of music that may be a bit unexpected. As I mentioned before, this song is considered by many to be one of the most popular numbers of the 19th century. So, in order to answer the question of where it came from, we need to go back to the mid-1800s with this man. The melody of Home Sweet Home was originally composed by the English composer, Sir Henry Rowley Bishop. Bishop was born in London, where his father was a watchmaker and a haberdasher. At the age of 13, Bishop left full-time education and worked with a music publisher. When he was just 18 years of age, his music was being performed in British theaters. Bishop would go on to compose a number of operas. But when I say opera, I mean more specifically British operas. These British operas were written in a style and format a bit different than what we think of opera today. They had more in common with the earlier native English ballad opera genre, or with modern musicals, than the classical opera of continental Europe. In 1823, Bishop wrote the music for what would be one of his most successful operas, entitled Clari, or The Maid of Milan. Included in this opera was the melody he created for it with the title Home Sweet Home. I'll play an early recording that will shed a bit more light on what this might have sounded like in a bit, but first we need to discuss where the lyrics came from. The words to the song were written by this man, John Howard Payne. Payne was born in New York City in 1791. Payne was a popular actor of the time, and after performing in New York theaters in 1813, he decided to try his hand at acting in London. Payne actually finds himself in the history books as the first American actor to perform widely in Europe. Payne wrote the lyrics to this tune at a time of intense unhappiness and loneliness in his life. Having left New York as a young man of 22, shortly after his father died, he had begun his acting career largely because of the death of his mother and the failure of his father's business. His wandering spirit led him to travel to a number of cities throughout Europe, where he always found himself alone and longing for home. In 1822, he was living in Paris, basically broke and staying in a cheap boarding room. One day, as the story goes, as he was sitting by his window, all alone, just listening to the cheerful, bustling crowds on the street below, he wrote a poem. And when he later joined up with Bishop to write the opera for Clari, that poem turned into a song. Home Sweet Home was a hit and soon became a beloved anthem across the entire English-speaking world. When it was later published separately, it sold around 100,000 copies. While Bishop made a good sum for the song, unfortunately for Payne, he sold his rights to the piece for a small flat fee and eventually spent the remainder of his life in debt, spending his final years as a consulate in Tunis. But the song would endure in the decades to follow. In 1852, Henry Bishop relaunched the song as a parlor ballad. It remained popular throughout the second half of the 1800s. By some accounts, the song was even banned from being played in Union Army camps during the Civil War. It was thought that the song would make the soldiers so homesick they would get the urge to abandon their duty and run away home. The song's popularity would continue to endure into the emergence of commercial recordings in the late 1800s. The tune was first recorded in 1897 by a xylophonist named Charles P. Lowe. By 1900, Home Sweet Home had already been recorded by at least 8 different artists in the U.S. And I'll leave you with a recording by the opera singer Elsie West Baker from 1914, which will give you an idea of what the song sounded like before all those string bands recorded it some years later. I'll be honest, I'm usually not a huge fan of this genre of music, but Baker's voice has this beautiful blend of sweetness and depth that goes right into your bones. So that's basically how an opera song turned into a parlor song, then into a vaudeville number, and then into an old-time tune, which eventually found its way into a bluegrass banjo breakdown. And that's all I got on Home Sweet Home. Hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for listening, folks.